Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israel here for Renaissance Periodization using performance to regulate your training volume. We already know how to do it from 2 weeks ago's videos of using the pump. We know how to do it from last week's video of using muscle disruption. Now exercise performance and its ability to help us auto-regulate volume. So we're going to talk about what within accumulation phase performances and why we should care. A little bit technical. We'll explain why. We're going to talk about using performance as a partial tool to inform volume manipulations. And of course, we're going to use performance to actually auto-regulate volume, raising or lowering the amount of training we're doing week to week to week to make sure we get our best hypertrophy outcomes. So here's the deal. What the hell is within accumulation performance and why do we care? Accumulation phase is week 1 all the way to whatever, week 4, 6, 8, whatever, before your deload, okay? The change in performance, how many reps and load you're getting per set, is that performance change within the accumulation. So like week 1 compared to week 2 to week 3 to week 4, week 5, etc., not between meso performance, which is like, okay, my PR in this mesocycle was this, and then deload in the next mesocycle, what's my PR? That's different. So here we're talking about just within a single accumulation phase, how does our performance, essentially our rep strength, how does our rep strength change throughout, and how quickly it changes or how it changes can help us inform what we should do with our training volume. Now, the performance is complex because at least 2 factors feed into how you perform every single time. One is, of course, fitness, which means maybe your muscle size is increasing, it should be, so you're getting higher performances from that. Maybe you're metabolically getting better at doing the lift and, there's more oxygen or wastes are leaving faster. You can get more reps that way, a little bit more load, same reps. And of course, neural and technical abilities, like your nervous system can be really figuring out how to do the lift, your technique improves, so all of a sudden your performance is going up. That's what makes performance go up. What leads performance to go down or pulls it down from any one point is fatigue. That accumulates throughout the mesocycle, eventually to unsustainable levels. But yeah, you get tired too, and not all that tiredness goes away by the next session. So while you are getting better, fatigue is pulling you down, and between those 2 factors is how performance is determined. Now, ideally, in an intelligently designed program, you want to scale performance to reps in reserve. So each week, when you start with roughly 3 reps in reserve, each week you should have a rough reps in reserve goal. So for example, just as an example, you can, week 1 is 3 reps in reserve goal. Week 2 is 2 reps in reserve, then 1 rep, then 0, then deload. Or you can stretch them out more and have 3, 3. So week 1 and week 2 are both 3. Week 3 and week 4 are both 2. And then 2 weeks are 1, 2 weeks are 0. And then you deload, something like that. But just generally, it should progress from 3 all the way to 0. Okay. And during that time, each week, you should have kind of a pre-planned goal of how many reps or how much weight to add every single session or every single week, rather. So you say, okay, I'm going to go from 3 RIR to 0 RIR. And during that time, I'm going to add like 5 pounds every time or a rep every time or 2.5 pounds plus a rep, so on and so forth, right? The ultimate goal of a really solid accumulation phase, a real mesocycle you look back on, you're like, man, I did great, is you hit your maximum recoverable volume, right? You're up to your volumes you can't possibly sustain. And the same week in which you also planned to hit your 0 RIR lift. So not only do you go all the way to failure, but you do it with such high volume that next week you can't repeat it. Because it can easily be the other way around where you can go to failure for like 3 weeks in a row and still not hit your MRV if your volume is low enough. So you can still match the same performance or even increase your performance. Ideally, what we want is that same week to be the end week, which means you're at your MRV and 0 RIR at the same time, peak week. It's a terrible time, but it lets you know you put everything you possibly could into your hypertrophy training, deload because you deserve it and you need it, and then you restart the progression again. So this is the universe in which we're going to be speaking about how to track performance. Given that we're doing all this, we have to consider, how we're going to change volume, right? So why do we care? Okay, why do we care about this? If you add volume way too quickly, you're going to reach your MRV way before you were attempting to do it. Right? If you don't increase your volume quickly enough, you can go weeks and weeks training all the way to failure, which is probably suboptimal with stimulus to fatigue ratio, but not hit your MRV because you're just training too little, right? In order to stay on track and have the best meso possible, you want some kind of intermediate level a volume adjustment so that your volume isn't too high, it's not too low, it's slowly rising, and then it peaks at the same time as you get 0 reps in reserve, and you've had a nice long time, at least 3 weeks, possibly more like 4 or more, to train consecutively, right? So that's the deal. Now, this performance, so we're going to be tracking performance and trying to change volume based on how we perform every session. It's not a complete tool. There's lots of erroneous stuff that can happen here. It's only a partial tool. It can't tell you for sure if you're stimulating muscle growth. It can't tell you how much muscle growth, and other signs have to be used, like the pump or like disruption, but it can be an important indicator. Let's find out how it works. The 2 things we need for this to work is set quality. You have to have good technique, and you have to be pushing it hard. If you're not doing that, then how the hell can you tell if you're supposed to be adding volume or subtracting it, where maybe just focusing on better set quality can leave you, with half the volume that you should have planned before, right? 4 amazing sets of leg press can be the same hypertrophic stimulus as 8 shitty sets of leg press. You don't want to be doing 8 sets and be like, I guess I got to do 10 next week because I barely got sore. My performance is really way too easy. You don't want to do that. So quality first, and minimal load progression has to be in place, or rep progression, or both, which is to say the goal should be to add at least 1 rep every session, or some load to the working sets, or some combination of both every single week. So you have to be pushing it the entire time. If that's the case, how do we auto-regulate performance, auto-regulate volume based on performance? Okay. If in order to have a challenging workout, sufficiently challenging from one week to another, in other words, in order to hit your rough RIR target, you need to increase the amount of load or the amount of reps by a ton. One thing we can tell is that you probably didn't accumulate a whole lot of fatigue in the week before, which is another way of saying there's a chance your volume was too low. So let's say you normally train with 5 or 6 sets of a shoulder press. You do 2 sets of shoulder press in the first week, or let's say 1. And then next week, you got to add way more weight to the bar or more reps than you were expecting, because otherwise it's just not anywhere close to the RI. It's not challenging. Well, it's not challenging because this one fucking set didn't hardly do shit. It didn't make you fatigued at all. That's good. But also it's just one set, so it probably didn't cause a lot of hypertrophy. If you want to hit mini PRs week after week after week and have them be meaningless and cause you some good neural gains, but no actual size gains, just keep the volume super low. That's how powerlifters train, and they're super fucking strong for their size, but there's a reason they're not the most jacked people in the world. And if they want to become the most jacked people, when powerlifters transition to bodybuilders, they do more volume, which makes them tired more often, which means they can't hit these crazy PRs all the time, but they can hit the small ones and get amazing work because the volume's high enough. So if you're way overperforming week to week to week, in other words, if this week is you hit all your targets way too easy, or in order for you to actually hit your targets successfully, you have to put way more weight or do way more reps, you can be not positive, but you can at least suspect that the week before you just fucking didn't do enough, right? Your fatigue's not high enough, and that's why that's happening. If performance is on track, okay, the reps in reserve, you planned a load progression and a rep progression, you hit exactly the RIR that you probably thought you wanted. So for example, first week is 3 RIR, you do a good amount of volume. Next week, you do the same amount of volume or maybe a little more or something, and you do 1 rep more in each set and 5 pounds more in each set, and you hit exactly somewhere between 2 and 3 RIR, you're fucking golden. Don't touch anything. That's probably the same amount of volume is going to do good. You may, under some conditions, be able to increase the volume just a little bit by 1 set, but not by much, because you're on track. Don't break the shit that works. You're on track. It's all going really well. On the other hand, if you have to violate your RIR goal in order to match your numbers, okay, and we do at RP recommend that you stick to your numbers. So if you squatted 200 for sets of 10 last week, this week is 205 for sets of 10 or sets of 11 or whatever you had planned. Don't just make it easier because you're like, well, no, I have to hit RIR too. RIR is real tough to guess, but plan progressions are real easy to follow. Follow your plan progression. And if following it, your RIR is lower than it was supposed to be, man, that means up to that point, you've had a lot of volume, and probably the week before was a fuckload of volume. It fatigued you, and it made that goal harder to reach than it should have been. A lot of other stuff can be wrong, which is why this is only a partial tool. But if you have a week in which you barely struggle to hit your numbers and you kind of hit them, but your RIRs were a little lower than you wanted, and you've got more weeks of training to do, almost certainly do not increase the volume. Either keep the volume the same or potentially reduce it a little bit. Lastly, if you actually reach failure and underperform, so for example, you did 100 pounds for 10 reps last week, but a fuckload of sets of 10s, you get so fatigued that this week at 105 pounds, you're expecting for equivalency at least 9 reps. You get 7 reps at 105 and then the bar falls on you and you're like, fuck, that's it. That's failure, right? If you truly underperform, you're pretty much by definition at MRV, and especially if that repeats in another session later in the week, you need to execute some sort of recovery strategy ASAP. That may be a recovery session, recovery half week, and if you YouTube, Google all these, that we've got videos on them, or a deload. Okay, that means you just pushed it way too hard. Here's the fucked up thing about fatigue. It accumulates, and once it's there, you just got to deal with it, right? Making a mess is a lot easier than cleaning up the mess. So volume progressions should by definition almost be conservative. Like if you think you can go up by 2 sets, but maybe 1, just go up by 1. Because if you get into this situation for point D here and it's too much, man, you can't just be like, oh, I'll just do less volume next week. Well, no, you're already over MRV. Your fatigue is sky high. Next week, you won't hit a PR. And then after that, you won't hit a PR. You're just in the shitty dead zone of being way too tired to do anything. You have to back away. You have to deload, which takes time away from super productive, maximally productive hypertrophy training. So if you're at point A, not bad, but you need to up the ante, probably do a little more volume next week. If you're at point B, fucking golden, don't touch anything. If you're at point C, really sleep a ton, really eat super well this next week. Definitely don't increase your volume, and potentially when you're increasing your load or reps, increase them very little next week because you're on that fine line, you're on that edge, and maybe consider actually reducing your volume a little bit so that you don't wash yourself in fatigue too soon. So for example, if you reach point C and it's week number 2 and you want to go for 4 weeks, you don't just have to think about week 3, you have to think about week 4 too. So if you did 6 sets of, let's say, curls, and now you're at point C in week 3. So in week 3 is you did 6 sets of curls in week 2, and now it's week 3. How many sets should you do? And like, if you do 6, you may actually overreach right there, and then week 4 is a fucking wash because you won't be able to hit your performance goals. So maybe, yeah, if you eat a lot, sleep a lot, whatever, and really nut up, you can do 6. Definitely don't do 7 or 8 sets, but there's some logic to doing like 4 or 5. You do 4 or 5 in week 3, and then you get good PRs. You break your records on how many reps you did or how much weight or both. And then week 4, you can go back up to 6 and then really spill it because it doesn't matter. Week 4 is the last week anyway. So again, playing the conservative game almost always pays off, right? That's it for using performance. Again, just very general and mostly works at the extremes. In the next video, we'll talk about how to combine pump, disruption, and performance indicators to start now really painting a much clearer picture of your training volume and really helping you make much better decisions about whether to stay the course in number of sets you do next week, increase or decrease. See you next time.